I arrived on Earth with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The small, water-covered planet had recently been admitted into the Galactic Alliance, and with it came promises of unique insights and, according to some rumors, unmatched military prowess. I doubted that last part. I am Velrek Thar, commander of the Korthithan Strategic Fleet. As an insectoid species, we value precision, logic, and efficiency in warfare. Every maneuver must serve a purpose. Emotion and unpredictability are weaknesses we've evolved past. For centuries, the Korthithan fleet has been regarded as the galaxy's most efficient military force. And yet, I had been ordered to this backwater world to observe their basic training. The Council had requested a thorough analysis, so I had to oblige, though I considered it a waste of time. We had all heard tales of human brutality. They were, after all, latecomers to the galactic stage, barely out of their industrial era when they were first discovered. But what could they truly know of warfare that advanced species like the Thaldari or Zarvixians hadn't mastered centuries ago? I assumed that this mission was more about politics than strategy. Humanity's inclusion into the Galactic Alliance was contentious, and many feared they would be more burden than benefit. I wasn't here to be impressed. I was here to gather facts. I was joined by 2 other observers, each representing the galaxy's best. Commander Raltha of the Thaldari stood tall beside me, his armored form gleaming under the Earth's yellow sun. His people had forged their identity through combat, though they now fought only ceremonial duels and ritualized battles. Then there was Captain Zithrix of the Zarvixians. He was smaller, slight, with 3 delicate fingers twitching nervously on each hand. The Zarvixians were intellectuals, pacifists by nature, but their technological advancements were unparalleled. Even in war, they relied on automated drones and precision strikes combat without personal risk. In contrast, the Korthithans preferred to be in the thick of things, though never without careful calculation. We had been briefed on Earth's military traditions. They were stubborn, refusing to adopt the refined protocols of the galaxy. Instead, they clung to something called basic training, a series of trials meant to prepare their soldiers for combat. Earth's representatives insisted that their methods were necessary, claiming their soldiers thrived on hardship and challenge. Still, none of us truly understood what that meant. That is, until the first hour of training. We were led to a barren, wind-swept terrain they called a desert, a place that humans considered hostile, though it seemed mild enough compared to the acidic storms of Korthatha Prime. The human soldiers, hundreds of them, stood in neat rows, their uniforms damp with sweat before the session had even begun. From what I could observe, they were all young males, with no visible signs of advanced cybernetics or enhancements. They were alarmingly ordinary. Their military instructor, a large man with dark, weathered skin and a voice like a sonic cannon, paced before them. Today, we begin Phase 1. You think you've known pain? You haven't. Not yet. But you will. I watched with mild amusement. Pain? Was that their metric for strength? How primitive. Without warning, the human instructor barked an order. The soldiers dropped to the ground and began a series of rapid physical movements, push-ups, sit-ups, and then running. Not impressive by any standard. The Korthithans would never waste energy on such frivolous physical exertion. Combat was about precision, not brute force. But then the heat began to rise. The temperature of the desert floor climbed steadily, and what I thought was a mild atmosphere soon felt like the furnace of a burning ship. These humans, however, kept going. Their bodies strained, muscles bulging, faces contorted in effort. Yet they did not stop. Sweat poured from them, soaking their clothes, but none of them collapsed. The instructor continued to scream at them, pushing them harder and harder. "They're overexerting themselves," Captain Zithrix muttered beside me, his black eyes narrowing with disbelief. "This level of strain is inefficient. They'll collapse within moments." Inefficient and reckless, I agreed, but a sliver of doubt crept into my mind. Minutes passed, then hours, and still they endured. Every time a soldier faltered, their instructor would be on them, barking insults and threats, forcing them back to their feet. There were no reprieves, no pauses, just a continuous, grueling march of physical torment. The heat was unbearable now, the ground shimmering with it, and yet the humans persisted. "This is," Ralph began, his deep voice betraying something I had never heard from him before: uncertainty. "This is madness." It wasn't just the physicality that was alarming. It was their willingness to push themselves far beyond what was necessary. The training had clearly moved past efficiency and into a territory we could not comprehend. By the time they reached the final phase of the day, they were bleeding, bruised, and limping, but not a single one had fallen out. Every soldier who collapsed was dragged back to his feet, and they were expected to continue. "Pain is just weakness leaving the body," their instructor screamed. I could see the logic behind the words, twisted though it was. To the humans, pain was not an enemy, it was a companion, a forge through which they created something stronger. But why? What drove them to this? I glanced at my fellow observers. Zithrix looked pale by Zarvixian standards, at least his thin arms crossed tightly, as if shielding himself from what we were witnessing. Ralpha remained silent, though I could see his jaw clenched in frustration. By the end of the first day, I realized something chilling. These humans, they weren't simply training for war. They were preparing for something far worse, something only they could understand. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the soldiers stood in ragged formation, their breaths ragged but steady. Their instructor gave one final command: "Dismissed." And just like that, it was over. The soldiers dragged themselves away, some of them leaning on each other for support, but not a single complaint passed their lips. They had endured, and it was only the first day. "What kind of species subjects themselves to this?" Zithrix whispered, horror evident in his tone. "What are they preparing for?" I did not answer, but the question echoed in my mind as well. What indeed? I had arrived on Earth expecting to witness the weaknesses of a primitive species. Instead, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about war, strength, and endurance. If this was their basic training, then the galaxy had gravely underestimated humanity. And something told me that this was only the beginning. The second day began before the sun had fully risen. I had barely rested, my mind still replaying the events of the previous day. The human soldiers were already awake, moving with mechanical precision as they assembled in formation. This time, we were taken to a different location, a forested region teeming with dense vegetation and uneven terrain. From the moment we arrived, I could sense a shift. There was an anticipation in the air, a raw tension that hadn't been present before. "Today's focus will be survival," their instructor announced, his voice cutting through the morning fog. "You're not soldiers if you can't survive. You're just bodies waiting to be buried." Ralpha, standing beside me, grunted in disapproval. "Survival training? This is where they'll falter. No species can thrive in these primitive conditions without advanced technology." I nodded, more out of habit than conviction. I still had reservations about these humans, but something gnawed at me, a sense that their training was more than mere tradition. It was a crucible, and they seemed more than willing to throw themselves into it. The soldiers were broken into squads, each tasked with navigating the forest while carrying heavy packs. The instructor gave them only minimal instructions, emphasizing that this was not a drill, it was a real test. They were given just enough food and water to last a single day, despite knowing they would be out there for 3. It was, by any logical measure, a death sentence. Ralpha, Zithrix, and I watched from a designated observation platform high above the forest. We had access to live feeds from drones following each squad, and I studied the humans' every move with a detached curiosity. The conditions were harsh, to say the least. The humidity was oppressive, insects swarmed around them, and the uneven terrain would have challenged even the hardiest of warriors. Yet, the humans trudged forward without complaint. "They're going to exhaust their resources far too quickly," Zithrix observed, his voice tinged with frustration. "Why don't they ration more conservatively?" I watched as one squad reached a particularly difficult section of the forest, a steep hill that required them to climb using only their hands and feet. Their progress was slow, and one soldier, clearly weakened from dehydration, began to lag behind. "Watch," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I expected. The others in his squad immediately noticed. 2 of them fell back, taking some of his pack weight onto their shoulders, while another handed him the last of their water ration. Without a word, they adjusted their pace, ensuring the struggling soldier wasn't left behind. "They're sharing resources?" Ralph's disbelief was evident. "That's inefficient. They're risking the success of the entire squad for one weak link." "They operate as a unit," I replied, more to myself than to him. "Their strength is not in their individual efficiency, but in their ability to compensate for one another's weaknesses." It was a revelation that unsettled me. For centuries, Korthithan's strategy had focused on the elimination of weakness. Weakness in any form, whether physical, emotional, or tactical, was to be purged. But these humans, they embraced it, worked through it, and somehow it made them stronger. Hours passed, and the terrain only became more unforgiving. I observed as one squad encountered a river that blocked their path. The flow was fast and deep, the kind that would swallow up any soldier foolish enough to attempt crossing without proper equipment. But what did these humans do? They formed a chain, linking arms as they waded into the water, supporting each other as the current threatened to tear them apart. They struggled, fought against the force of nature, and one by one, they made it across. Ralpha exhaled sharply. "They should have lost at least half of that squad." "But they didn't," I muttered, though I could scarcely believe it myself. Zithrix looked pale again, his dark eyes wide as he stared at the screen. "It's not logical. This camaraderie, it's reckless." "Perhaps," I said slowly, "or perhaps it's their greatest asset." As the day wore on, the challenges only intensified. The soldiers were subjected to a grueling combination of natural obstacles and artificial traps set by their instructors. I watched in awe as they navigated through thick mud, climbed rock faces with bleeding hands, and fashioned crude tools out of whatever they could find. One of the squads, clearly exhausted and low on supplies, came across a fallen tree. Blocking their path, it was too large to climb and too heavy to move easily. Most species would have found another way around or waited for assistance. The Korthithans would have deployed a drone to remove the obstacle. The human, however, had no such luxury. They immediately set to work, using their remaining strength to chop at the tree with makeshift axes. It was a slow, laborious process, but they did not stop. Hours later, they had cut through enough of the tree to allow passage. Their hands were bloodied, their energy sapped, yet they moved forward with a grim determination that sent a chill down my exoskeleton. "Why do they do this?" Zithrix asked, his voice trembling. "Why push themselves beyond reason?" I didn't have an answer. I wasn't sure any of us did. Logic dictated that they should have stopped, given up, or at the very least reconsidered their approach. But these humans had an almost pathological refusal to quit. Every time they were knocked down, they rose again, as if the act of enduring itself was a form of victory. By nightfall, the squads began to converge on a central location, a clearing where they would be extracted. The instructors had set a final challenge. Only the squads that arrived with all members intact would receive the highest commendation. The rest would be deemed failures. One squad, lagging behind, had suffered several injuries. They moved slowly, burdened by their wounded. It was clear they would not make it in time. Yet, instead of abandoning the injured to ensure their own success, the healthy soldiers distributed the weight evenly, carrying their comrades with them. Ralph growled in frustration. "They're sabotaging themselves. They'll fail the test." "They don't care about the test," I said, realization dawning on me. "It's not about passing, it's about survival as a unit." The lagging squad crossed the finish line just before the extraction ships arrived, their members barely able to stand. But they were all there, together, every last one of them. The instructor nodded in approval, though his expression remained as hard as ever. "Not bad, but you'll have to do better tomorrow." I stood there, watching the scene unfold, my mind racing with questions. I had expected to witness failure, chaos, and disorganization. Instead, I had seen a species that thrived on adversity, one that drew strength not from its technology or individual prowess, but from its ability to endure to survive as a collective, no matter the odds. As the extraction ships lifted off, I turned to my fellow observers. Zithrix was silent, his hands trembling slightly. Raltha remained tense, his face a mask of unreadable emotion. "They're stronger than we anticipated," I admitted, my voice barely audible. Raltha said nothing, but the look in his eyes told me that he had reached the same conclusion. What we had witnessed was not mere training, it was a glimpse into something far more dangerous. These humans, with their stubbornness and their relentless drive, had the potential to change everything we thought we knew about war. And we had only scratched the surface. The third day of human training began like a storm on the horizon, dark and brooding, with an intensity that hummed through the air. I felt uneasy as we gathered once again on the observation platform, our eyes fixated on the massive training grounds below. Today's challenge was combat, a subject I thought I understood well. War was an art to the Korthithans, a precise dance of tactics, weaponry, and overwhelming force. How could these humans, with their primitive weapons and brutish ways, possibly impress us in this arena? Their instructor stood before them like an ancient war god, arms crossed over a chest that seemed carved from stone. His voice, as always, was devoid of warmth. "You've survived the wilderness. Good. But surviving isn't enough. Now, you fight. Today, we'll separate the soldiers from the grunts." The soldiers stood in rigid silence, waiting for their orders. The glint in their eyes was something I recognized a predator's focus. It sent an involuntary shiver through me. They were no longer recruits learning the ropes. They had evolved in these few days, hardened by the trials that had nearly broken them. "Today's exercise is straightforward," the instructor continued. "Squad-based combat. Use any means necessary to eliminate the opposing teams. No lethal weapons, but don't hold back. The objective is simple: be the last squad standing." Zithrix leaned forward, his eyes wide with a gleam of excitement. "Finally, something tangible. Surely they'll falter here. They lack the sophisticated weapons we've mastered." I wasn't so sure anymore. Yesterday had revealed a fundamental truth about humans: they were resilient beyond reason. But combat was a different beast. It wasn't just about resilience, it was about skill, strategy, and execution. Could they possibly outmatch us in something as essential as war? The soldiers were handed modified versions of their standard weapons: blunt-edged blades, stun batons, and non-lethal ammunition designed to incapacitate rather than kill. The squads were once again broken into teams, sent to various sections of a sprawling urban combat simulation zone complete with abandoned buildings, narrow alleyways, and debris-laden streets. From our elevated position, we could see everything. The drones buzzed above, giving us live feeds of each squad's movements. The terrain was perfect for ambushes, traps, and guerrilla tactics, a setting that required cunning and precision to navigate. "Now we'll see their true weaknesses," Raltha muttered beside me. "Brute force and stubbornness won't win them this fight." The signal was given, and the exercise began. At first, it was exactly what I expected. Squads moved cautiously through the simulated city, keeping low, using cover, communicating through hand signals. This, I understood. It was what any military force would do: minimize exposure, avoid detection, strike when the enemy was vulnerable. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized something alarming. These humans weren't just reacting to their environment, they were adapting to it, faster than I could have anticipated. The first skirmish broke out in an alleyway between two opposing squads. One squad, crouching behind a series of burnt-out vehicles, opened fire on a second squad moving through the open. The sound of non-lethal rounds echoed across the battlefield, but what happened next caught me off guard. The squad under fire didn't scatter in panic. Instead, they regrouped, their leader giving quick, decisive commands. Using the wreckage of a nearby building for cover, they maneuvered around the flanks of their attackers, cutting off their escape routes. In moments, the ambush turned into a trap for the original attackers. One by one, the soldiers hiding behind the vehicles were picked off, stunned into submission. "They're using strategy," Zithrix murmured, astonishment creeping into his voice. I could only nod in agreement. There was nothing chaotic about their movements. Each squad operated with an eerie synchronization, their actions precise and methodical. What they lacked in advanced technology, they more than made up for with tactical ingenuity. It wasn't about who had the better weapons, it was about who could outthink and outmaneuver their opponents. More engagements followed, each more surprising than the last. In one section of the simulated city, a squad laid a trap by rigging the environment with improvised explosives, stun grenades crafted from their surroundings. When an enemy squad approached, unaware, the devices detonated in a brilliant flash of light, disabling half their team. The survivors were swiftly subdued in close-quarters combat, overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the attack. Ralph grunted, his arms crossed tightly. "They're improvising. That shouldn't be possible. Their technology is rudimentary." "It's not about the tools," I said quietly, the words forming as the realization hit me. "It's about the mind behind them." As the battle dragged on, something else became apparent. Their pain tolerance was inhuman. I watched with disbelief as a soldier took a hit to the leg, dropping him to the ground. By all rights, he should have been out of the fight, but instead, he gritted his teeth, wrapped a tourniquet around his leg, and crawled forward, still intent on reaching his objective. Others, hit by stun rounds or overwhelmed by fatigue, pushed themselves far beyond the limits I had assumed were universal. "Look at them," Zithrix whispered, his eyes wide. "They refuse to stop. They'd rather die than lose." And he was right. Squad after squad fell, but none of them surrendered. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, they fought with an intensity that bordered on madness. By the end of the exercise, only one squad remained standing, battered and bruised but victorious. The others had either been incapacitated or withdrawn, but not a single soldier had given up voluntarily. The instructor stepped forward, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Not bad," he said, his voice carrying across the field. "You've got the basics. Now let's see what you can really do." "What more could they possibly have left to prove?" Ralph muttered, but I knew better now. There was always something more with these humans, always another layer of resilience, another hidden reserve of strength. As the instructor barked out new orders, the victorious squad helped their fallen comrades to their feet, dragging the unconscious ones to the extraction point. Despite their injuries and exhaustion, they moved with a sense of duty that I had never seen before. Duty. That was the word. These humans weren't just training for the sake of survival. They were training for something bigger than themselves. They fought not because they were ordered to, but because they felt a responsibility to each other, to their squad, to their cause. "They don't fight like we do," I said softly, watching as the soldiers disappeared into the distance. "For us, war is a calculation. For them, it's personal." Ralph remained silent, his gaze fixed on the battlefield below. Zithrix, for once, seemed to have no words. I couldn't shake the feeling that what we had witnessed was only a fraction of what the humans were capable of. They had endured grueling survival trials, displayed remarkable ingenuity in combat, and shown a level of teamwork that defied logic. But more than that, they had shown us something far more dangerous, a willingness to push themselves beyond any limit, to sacrifice everything for victory. And that, I realized with growing dread, was what made them truly terrifying. The fourth day of human training marked the arrival of a new challenge: endurance and survival under duress. By now, we had seen enough to know that underestimating these creatures was a mistake, but there was still a sense of disbelief in the air. The theory had always been that humans, despite their resilience, had a breaking point like any other species. And today, I thought, we would witness that point. But I was wrong. As the sun rose over the training grounds, casting long shadows across the makeshift arena, the soldiers assembled once again, their faces grim and resolute. There was no sign of the fatigue they must have felt after days of relentless physical and mental strain. No visible cracks in their composure. "This will be the final test," the instructor said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You will be pushed beyond your limits. Failure is expected, survival is not guaranteed. The statement sent a ripple of uncertainty through the observers around me, but not among the humans. They stood silent, still, like statues waiting for orders. "They will fail today," Ralpha muttered, leaning against the railing beside me. "No one can endure this much punishment indefinitely." He wasn't wrong. I had studied human biology, how their muscles broke down under extreme stress, how their minds faltered under exhaustion, how even their advanced medical technology couldn't save them from themselves when pushed too far. Yet, there they stood, as if the word limit didn't apply to them. The challenge was brutal in its simplicity: march. For hours. With nothing but minimal rations, basic water supplies, and whatever gear they could carry. The terrain they would be navigating was treacherous and artificially constructed desert, designed to sap every ounce of moisture from the body and grind bones to dust. The sun was merciless, glaring down from an alien sky that promised no relief. "This is madness," Zithrix whispered, his wide eyes locked on the starting line. Not even Korthithan soldiers would endure such a test without protest. But the humans did not protest. One by one, they began their march, their footsteps steady and synchronized as they ventured into the blistering heat. Hours passed, and we watched from the comfort of the observation deck as the temperature rose to unbearable levels. The desert stretched on endlessly, a sea of shifting sands and jagged rocks that seemed designed to break even the hardiest soldier. And yet, the humans marched. The first sign of fatigue came after the second hour. A soldier stumbled, falling to one knee, his breath ragged. I leaned forward, expecting him to signal for assistance or to call it quits. But he didn't. Instead, he reached into his pack, downed a meager ration of water, and forced himself back to his feet. The march continued. The hours dragged on, and the toll became visible. Soldiers began to stagger, their movements slowing as the heat drained the life from them. But none of them stopped. Not even when one collapsed, his body giving out under the weight of his gear and the oppressive sun. His squad mates didn't leave him behind, though. Two of them hoisted him up, sharing his burden between them, and continued the march. "They refuse to fall," Ralpha said, his tone now more curious than condescending. "Even when they have no strength left, they keep moving." "They rely on each other," I replied, watching as another squad worked together to haul an unconscious comrade up a steep incline. "They've turned this into more than just a test of endurance. It's about survival as a group." As the hours passed, more fell. Some were dragged, others carried, but none were left behind. The march transformed from an individual trial into a collective struggle for survival. I had never seen anything like it. In the Galactic military, soldiers who fell behind were simply left to fend for themselves. It was the way of things, survival of the fittest, the strongest, the most capable. But these humans didn't seem to follow that logic. They protected their weak. They carried their fallen. They pushed forward, not as individuals, but as a singular force, bound by an unspoken oath to endure together. By the 10th hour, I was certain that the test would end. No species could survive such conditions for so long, not even humans. But the instructor, standing on the ridge overlooking the desert, showed no signs of calling it off. His expression remained as cold and unreadable as ever, even as the soldiers began to collapse en masse. The heat was unrelenting, the water supplies nearly depleted, and yet still they marched. My breath caught in my throat as I saw something that made my blood run cold. A soldier, one of the strongest among them, collapsed in the sand, his body limp. His squad mates rushed to his side, but he didn't move. He was done. Finished. Or so I thought. In a display that defied all logic, the soldier groaned, pushed himself onto his elbows, and began to crawl. His legs were useless, his body trembling with exhaustion, but he crawled. His squad mates watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to help him or let him continue his impossible struggle. "He can't be serious," Zithrix muttered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "He's going to kill himself." But the soldier didn't stop. Inch by inch, he dragged himself forward, clawing at the sand with bloodied hands. His squad mates eventually stepped in, lifting him up, but he fought to keep moving on his own. "That's not normal," Ralph said, his voice soft. "Even we would stop after a certain point." "They don't stop," I whispered, shaking my head. "They don't know how." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sun began to set. The march had stretched on for nearly 14 hours, and the survivors, those few who were still standing, dragged their feet toward the extraction point. There was no celebration, no sense of triumph in their movements, just exhaustion. But they had done it. They had endured. Somehow, they had survived the test, even when everything should have told them to quit. As the last of the soldiers collapsed in a heap at the extraction point, the instructor stepped forward, his eyes scanning the broken, battered figures before him. His expression didn't change, but I could sense the approval in his voice. "Good," he said simply. "You'll do." It was a gross understatement. Zithrix, Ralpha, and I remained silent as we left the observation deck. I could tell from the tension in the air that they were grappling with the same question I was: what kind of species was this? The humans had proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they were unlike anything we had ever encountered. It wasn't just their resilience or their strength. It was something deeper, something more terrifying. "They're not just warriors," I said aloud, more to myself than to my companions. "They're survivors." Ralpha shook his head. "They're more than that. They're unstoppable." Zithrix didn't respond. For once, the smug superiority he always carried had been stripped away, leaving behind only quiet contemplation. As we returned to our quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that what we had witnessed was more than just a display of human endurance. It was a glimpse into something far more dangerous, a species that refused to be broken, no matter the odds, a species that, when pushed to the edge, only grew stronger. The rest of the galaxy had no idea what it was dealing with. By the time the final endurance test had ended, the mood within the Galactic observation contingent had changed drastically. The condescending smirks and veiled mockery that had filled the air days before were long gone. Now, as we gathered for the debriefing, the silence was heavy with a mix of unease and something that felt disturbingly close to fear. "They broke the course record," Ralpha muttered, his voice low as we entered the briefing chamber. "No one has ever completed that march in less than 15 hours. "Their time was 14, I replied, still struggling to process what we had seen. "And that was with half of them carrying the other half. It doesn't make sense." Ralpha shot me a sharp glance, his usually arrogant posture now more subdued. "You're starting to sound like you admire them, Borland." I didn't respond immediately. How could I? What I felt wasn't admiration. It was wariness, an instinctual realization that I had witnessed something far beyond what any species in the galaxy was capable of. These humans, they weren't like the others. They didn't adhere to the same laws of biology, of reason. Their endurance defied logic, their unity was unmatched, and their determination was unsettling. "I admire survival," I finally said, as we took our seats in the debriefing hall. "And that's what they are, survivors." Ralpha grunted, but said nothing more. The debriefing room was packed with representatives from dozens of species, all of whom had watched the same grueling tests we had. The usual hum of conversation that filled these gatherings was notably absent, replaced by a tense quiet. All eyes were on the central stage, where the human instructor, Sergeant Major Dwyer, stood waiting to address us. I studied the human as we settled in. His posture was rigid, his face as impassive as it had been throughout the entire training. Nothing seemed to faze him, not the grueling conditions, not the borderline lethal tests, and certainly not the growing whispers among the Galactic delegation. "They don't break," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. "No," a voice responded from behind me, causing me to turn. It was Zithrix, his normally wide-set eyes narrowed in something close to respect. "They don't." Sergeant Major Dwyer wasted no time in beginning the debriefing. "The soldiers you've observed," he said, his deep voice cutting through the tension in the room, "have completed what we call basic training. It's the foundation of what it means to be a human soldier. There was a murmur of disbelief from several of the observers around me. Basic training. The trials we had witnessed, endurance marches, survival under extreme duress, hand-to-hand combat that bordered on barbaric, these were merely the basics. They have undergone only the preliminary tests, Dwyer continued, as if oblivious to the shock rippling through the room. Their real training begins after this. Once they are deployed, they'll be shaped further into soldiers capable of surviving any environment, any battle, any war. Any war. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to question the assertion. Zithrix leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. They're not just preparing for war, they're preparing for anything. I couldn't argue. The evidence was undeniable. The human training regimen wasn't just about combat, it was about adaptability, about preparing soldiers for any conceivable situation. The tests we had witnessed were brutal, yes, but they were also meticulously designed to push the humans to the brink of physical and mental collapse. But they never collapsed. Dwyer continued his briefing, outlining the purpose behind each stage of the training, each test designed to forge not just soldiers, but survivors. There was an almost clinical precision to his explanations, as if the humans had perfected the science of war. But even as I listened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Survival is important, Ralpha whispered to me, but this feels excessive. What are they preparing for? That was the question that had been gnawing at me since the endurance march. These tests weren't just designed to create effective soldiers, they were designed to create soldiers who could thrive in environments that no other species would even attempt. And for what? War? Or something more? The debriefing ended, but the unease lingered. As the observers filed out of the room, I caught sight of Sergeant Major Dwyer speaking with one of the human officers. His expression remained unreadable, but there was something in the way he carried himself that hinted at more than just military professionalism. There was a weight behind his eyes, a depth of experience that I couldn't quite place. "Do you think they're hiding something?" Zithrix asked, falling into step beside me as we left the chamber. "I think they're always hiding something," I replied. "That's what makes them so dangerous." Zithrix's brow furrowed, his antennae twitching in thought. "We've studied their history, their biology. We know how their minds work. So why do they still seem different?" I didn't have an answer. The humans were an anomaly, a species that operated under a different set of rules, both biologically and psychologically. They were unpredictable in ways that no other race was. And that unpredictability made them a threat. Later that evening, I found myself wandering the observation deck overlooking the training grounds. The desert had cooled, the brutal heat of the day replaced by a biting chill. I watched as the human soldiers, those who had survived the day's ordeal, gathered around their makeshift camp. Their movements were slow, tired, but they were still alive, still functioning, still together. "That could have been us, you know," a voice said from behind me. I turned to find Ralpha standing there, his arms crossed. His expression was unusually thoughtful, his gaze focused on the humans below. "They could have been the ones studying us, watching us run through obstacle courses, pushing us to our limits," he continued. "But they're not. We're the ones watching them." I nodded, understanding the subtext of his words. It wasn't just that humans had become a focal point of the galactic military's attention, it was that they had earned that attention. Through sheer will, they had elevated themselves to a place where even the most advanced species couldn't help but take notice. "They're more than we expected," I said, watching as one of the human soldiers tended to a fallen comrade, offering him water and a reassuring hand on the shoulder. "And I don't think we've seen their full potential yet." Ralpha nodded, his expression grim. "No, we haven't." The days that followed were a blur of further tests and evaluations, each more grueling than the last. The humans continued to defy expectations, enduring trials that would have shattered even the hardiest of Korthithan warriors. It became clear that their strength wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something intangible that allowed them to push beyond the limits of what we thought was possible. And it wasn't just us who noticed. Whispers began to spread among the galactic delegation. whispers of human superiority, whispers of their unyielding resilience. Even the most skeptical species began to reconsider their positions, their eyes drawn to the humans like moths to a flame. "They're becoming more than soldiers," Zithrix said one night, as we observed the latest round of hand-to-hand combat training. "They're becoming symbols." I couldn't argue. The humans were more than just a military force. Now they were a beacon of survival, a testament to the power of sheer will. And in a galaxy where strength was everything, that made them dangerous. Very dangerous. The training sessions we'd observed were supposed to conclude with the final endurance march, but the humans weren't done. Every species in the galactic delegation had agreed that there would be no need for further demonstrations. And yet, the humans requested no, insisted on one final test. That's when we learned about the Crucible. Sergeant Major Dwyer introduced it as a rite of passage for all human soldiers. It was different from the other tests, designed to push recruits not only physically but mentally and emotionally. The details were sparse, but the name alone carried weight, something primal, something ancient. The very words sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. "They want to break us," Ralpha murmured, standing beside me. His eyes were wide as we received the announcement. "No species should be able to handle this." "Maybe that's the point," I said, trying to suppress my own rising unease. The following morning, we gathered at the observation tower, overlooking the sprawling wilderness the humans had transformed into a crucible of trials. The recruits had already been deployed into the thick of it. From our vantage point, we could see some of them moving through the environment below, no longer the arid desert, but a lush, forested area teeming with threats. The Crucible was different from the previous trials in that it wasn't a series of tasks with clear goals. Instead, it was survival. Pure, unfiltered survival in a simulated combat zone, with no clear end in sight. The human recruits had no idea when it would end, only that it would, eventually, and that they had to endure. I watched as the galactic delegation fidgeted in their seats. No one had expected this. The humans had kept the existence of the Crucible hidden from us, and now that it was unfolding, there was no turning back. "Are they insane?" Zithrix asked, his voice hushed, as if afraid the humans might overhear. "There's no rest, no breaks. They've been awake for 36 standard hours already. This is torture." I glanced at Zithrix, and I could see the unease in his antennae, the way they twitched nervously. For once, I found myself agreeing with him. The recruits below had been pushed beyond any reasonable limit, yet the humans had devised a test designed to break them even further. But they weren't breaking. Down below, I spotted a group of humans moving through the dense foliage, their movements slow but deliberate. Even from this distance, I could see the exhaustion on their faces, the strain in their bodies. They should have collapsed hours ago. Any other species would have. But they were still going. Ralpha shifted beside me, his normally arrogant demeanor reduced to a quiet disbelief. "This is beyond any tactical necessity," he muttered. "They're pushing them to the edge for the sake of it." I wasn't so sure. Hours passed. The recruits were still in the field. Some had collapsed from exhaustion, but not a single one had quit. Those who fell were carried by their comrades, much like we'd seen during the endurance march. There was a deep sense of camaraderie, a bond between them that transcended mere military discipline. It was more than loyalty, it was survival as a unit. That's what they're teaching them, I realized aloud. It's not just about individual strength. It's about never leaving anyone behind. Ralpha raised a brow. "What do you mean?" "They're not training soldiers," I said slowly, my mind piecing together the puzzle. "They're training a collective, a force that doesn't break, because no one is ever allowed to fail alone." Ralpha looked at me as though I'd just spoken blasphemy. But he didn't argue. How could he? The proof was right in front of us, moving through the simulated battlefield below. By the time the humans finally called an end to the Crucible, 50 hours had passed since the test began. 50 hours of grueling, non-stop survival, combat, and endurance. The recruits were beyond exhausted, they were spent. Yet when they returned to the base, there was no bitterness or anger in their eyes, only a fierce pride. Sergeant Major Dwyer greeted them with a nod, his expression unreadable as always. He said something quietly to each of the recruits, a word of acknowledgement, perhaps, or congratulations. We couldn't hear from where we stood, but the message was clear. They had survived. No one else could have. Later, as the debriefing hall filled with murmurs of disbelief and quiet awe, I found myself thinking back to everything we had seen over the past weeks. The humans had defied every expectation. They had endured trials that should have broken them. Yet they stood before us now, more unified and determined than any military force I had ever witnessed. "They're monsters," Ralpha whispered beside me, his voice thick with something close to fear. I shook my head. "No, they're not monsters. They're something else, something worse." Ralpha turned to me, confused. "Worse? What could be worse than that?" "They're survivors," I said quietly, my gaze fixed on the human recruits as they filed out of the hall. "They don't just survive, they thrive in adversity, and when they're pushed to the brink, they come out stronger." Ralpha said nothing, but I could see the understanding dawning in his eyes. The Galactic delegation was dismissed not long after. The humans had finished their demonstration, and we had seen all that we needed to see. Yet as we made our way back to the transport vessels, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the galaxy that day. We had always assumed that we were the pinnacle of evolution, that our technological advancements and superior tactics made us untouchable. But the humans had shown us something different. They had shown us that the mind and the will were more powerful than any weapon. That survival wasn't about strength, it was about endurance, about refusing to break no matter the odds. As we prepared to depart, Zithrix approached me, his expression unusually somber. "What do we do now?" he asked quietly. "How do we respond to this?" I didn't have an answer. The humans had proven something far more dangerous than their combat abilities. They had proven that they could adapt to anything. And in a galaxy where change was the only constant, that made them the most dangerous species of all. We returned to our own ship in silence. The corridors of the Galactic transport felt hollow, every sound a muted echo, as if the air itself was weighed down by what we had witnessed. The mood among the delegation was somber, no one daring to break the fragile calm. We had been sent to observe, to evaluate, and possibly to dismiss the human threat. Instead, we left with a growing sense of dread. Even Ralpha, normally vocal in his disdain for other species, remained uncharacteristically quiet. He sat in the common area, staring into nothingness, his drink untouched before him. The others had already dispersed to their quarters, eager to escape the gravity of the situation. I joined Ralpha, though I couldn't think of anything useful to say. "They're not like us," he muttered, breaking the silence. I nodded. There was no point in denying it. "Other species, they reach a limit," he continued. "A breaking point. But these humans? They don't have one. What drives them?" It was a question I'd been wrestling with since the first day of observation. In every battle, there was an endpoint, a moment where the body or the mind refused to continue. But humans didn't just ignore that, they seemed to grow stronger from it. Where did it come from? Was it fear? Was it desperation? Or was it something else entirely? "Their history is full of it," I said after a moment. "Struggle, catastrophe, wars that nearly destroyed them. Maybe they're just used to it." Ralpha shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "Used to it? That's not enough. There's something deeper." I couldn't disagree. The way the recruits had carried one another, the way they had refused to falter even after 50 hours of unrelenting pressure, it wasn't just strength, it was something primal. "I've never seen anything like it," Ralpha muttered again, his voice a mix of awe and fear. Neither had I. The transport departed Earth's orbit, leaving behind the turbulent blue sphere that had caused so much upheaval in the Galactic delegation. As we settled back into the cold vacuum of space, a question gnawed at me, a question I hadn't dared to voice until now. Had we provoked them? By observing their training, by pressing them for more tests, Had we inadvertently revealed our own weaknesses? I turned the thought over in my mind, but before I could dwell on it, the ship's communications lit up. Zithrix, his tone stiff and formal, summoned the delegation to the briefing room. Something urgent, apparently. Ralpha and I exchanged a look, but we both knew there was no time to speculate. We made our way to the briefing room, finding the rest of the delegation already assembled. The air inside was thick with tension. Zithrix stood at the front, his posture rigid. His usual sneer had vanished, replaced by something far more unsettling concern. "What's this about?" Ralpha asked, breaking the uneasy silence. Zithrix's antennae twitched. "We received a transmission from the human military command. That caught everyone's attention. We hadn't expected any further communication after our departure. Had we violated some protocol? Was there an issue with the observation?" Without further preamble, Zithrix activated the holoscreen, and the image of a human officer appeared, a figure we recognized immediately, Sergeant Major Dwyer. "I will keep this brief," Dwyer began, his tone clipped. "You've seen what we're capable of. But don't make the mistake of thinking that basic training represents our limits." The room was dead silent. "You observed our soldiers during their formative weeks. But what you didn't see was the full extent of our military capability. You didn't see our advanced operations teams, our elite forces, or our special divisions. What you saw was only the beginning." Ralpha shifted uncomfortably beside me, his eyes locked on the hologram. I could feel the tension radiating from him. Dwyer continued, "I know why you came. You came to evaluate whether we are a threat, whether we pose a danger to the balance of power in the galaxy, and you're right to be concerned." A cold chill swept over the room. "But let me be clear, we have no desire for war. Humanity has faced enough conflict within its own borders to understand the cost. We don't seek to dominate. We don't seek to conquer. But if we are threatened, if we are attacked, we will defend ourselves with everything we have." The finality in his words hung in the air like a sharpened blade. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the delegation in stunned silence. Zithrix turned to us, his expression unreadable. "We have a decision to make." "What kind of decision?" I asked cautiously. "Whether to treat humanity as a potential ally," he said slowly, "or as an emerging threat." Ralpha scoffed. "They are a threat. Didn't you hear him? They're capable of far more than what we saw." "And that's precisely why we need to consider diplomacy," Zithrix replied, his antennae twitching with agitation. "If we antagonize them, we could be inviting disaster." A murmur rippled through the room as the other delegates absorbed his words. The humans had left us with a choice, and neither option was without risk. If we moved too aggressively, we could spark a war we weren't prepared for. But if we hesitated, if we underestimated them, we could be inviting something far worse. "They don't want war," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "They've been clear about that." Ralpha turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "And you believe them? You think they'll just sit back and let us continue as we have?" I hesitated. The truth was, I wasn't sure. Humans were an enigma, a species that defied categorization. They were simultaneously resilient and fragile, capable of great compassion and unspeakable violence. But what Dwyer had said, it felt genuine. Humanity didn't want war. But that didn't mean they wouldn't fight if it came to them. "I think we need to tread carefully," I said finally. "If they don't want war, then provoking them could be the worst thing we could do." Ralpha looked like he wanted to argue, but he held his tongue. The others seemed equally uncertain, caught between fear and pragmatism. Zithrix, however, was resolute. "We'll need to report back to the High Council. They'll make the final decision. But my recommendation is clear: we must avoid conflict at all costs." The rest of the journey passed in a blur. The delegation was subdued, our discussions muted and tentative. The humans had shown us their strength, but more importantly, they had shown us their potential. And that potential was vast, far vaster than any of us had anticipated. By the time we reached the galactic capital, I had made up my mind. Humanity wasn't just another species in the galaxy. They were something more, something unpredictable, and that made them the most dangerous force we had ever encountered. As the transport docked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The galaxy was about to change, one way or another, and humanity would be at the center of it all. Returning to the galactic capital was always a welcome reprieve from the constant tension of deep space observation missions. But this time, it felt different. As we disembarked from the transport, the usual fanfare from various diplomats and representatives was absent. Perhaps the message we had sent ahead to the High Council had tempered any celebratory greetings. Even the skies, normally bright and clear, were heavy with the weight of a coming storm. The briefing room for the High Council awaited us, its imposing archways flanked by guards from various member species, each keeping a watchful eye. The chamber was filled with delegates, a mix of ambassadors, military leaders, and the council members themselves. I glanced at Ralpha, who walked beside me. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a wariness that mirrored my own. We had seen something none of them could comprehend. They were about to hear it. The High Council's center seats were occupied by its most powerful members, including the elder species the Thorics, an insectoid race known for their strict adherence to rules, and the Algani, ethereal beings who had evolved past physical conflict millennia ago. Their voices would carry the most weight, and convincing them of the urgency of the situation would be no small task. Zithrix, our mission lead, stood at the front of the room, waiting for the signal. When it came, a low chime echoed through the chamber, drawing everyone's attention. He wasted no time, launching directly into his report. Honored members of the Council, what we have observed on Earth defies conventional understanding, Zithrix began, his voice calm but carrying the gravity of his message. Humanity, while still technologically behind in some areas, has developed a military force that is unlike anything we have seen before. A murmur spread through the room, but Zithrix continued undeterred. We were allowed to observe their basic training regimen, just the beginning stages of their military development. What we saw was alarming. His antennae twitched as he looked around the room. Humans possess a resilience far beyond our expectations. Their ability to endure both physical and psychological hardship is unparalleled among the species of this council. More concerning, however, is their relentless drive. They do not stop. They do not falter. Ralpha shifted beside me, clearly agitated by the silence that followed. I, too, felt the weight of their scrutiny. These council members had no idea what they were truly facing, and it seemed they didn't fully believe us. One of the Thoric's representatives spoke up, their voice sharp and clicking. We have heard claims of resilience before. Many species pride themselves on such traits. Why should we believe that these humans are any different? Zithrix activated the holo display, and footage from the training we had witnessed appeared before the council. The images of recruits pushing themselves through unbearable conditions, carrying their wounded comrades, and still moving forward played across the chamber. This is not normal endurance, Zithrix continued. These humans are capable of pushing beyond what we understand as breaking points. Their neural scans show levels of pain tolerance that should render them unconscious, yet they continue. They're able to adapt quickly, learn from their mistakes, and improve. This is not just physical, it's mental, and it's deeply ingrained in their species. A council member from the Algani floated forward, their translucent form shimmering as they spoke in their harmonic voice. And what is your recommendation, Observer Zithrix? Do you propose that we treat them as a threat? The room went silent again as Zithrix hesitated. His compound eyes flicked to us briefly, then back to the council. I propose caution. While they do not seek conflict, they are more than capable of defending themselves, and should they perceive a threat to their survival, they will retaliate with force beyond what we anticipated. Another council member, a representative from the Kleider, a reptilian species known for their militaristic tendencies, leaned forward. Retaliate? Are you saying that these humans would be able to stand against the Galactic Council's combined forces? Ralpha snorted softly under his breath. He couldn't hold his tongue any longer. "They've done it before," he said, drawing sharp glances from everyone in the room. "Their own world has a long history of conflict. They've fought themselves for centuries, driven each other to the brink of extinction, and every time, they've come back stronger." The murmuring grew louder, but Zithrix raised his hand to quiet them. "They are no strangers to war," Zithrix affirmed. "But what concerns me most is their unpredictability. Unlike most species, humans don't rely solely on strength or technology. They rely on ingenuity, adaptation, and sheer willpower. If they are provoked, if they feel they have no other option, they will not stop until they've ensured their survival." The Algani representative hovered closer, their voice now softer but still melodic. "And how do you propose we proceed, then? We cannot alter the trajectory of this galaxy based on fear alone. We must have a solution." Zithrix nodded. "We open diplomatic channels. We find common ground. If we approach them as allies rather than threats, we may avoid the very conflict we seek to prevent. But we must tread carefully." I could see the doubt lingering in the faces of the council members. Many of them had never faced a species like humanity, one that didn't fit neatly into the established order of things. They were accustomed to understanding their enemies, to controlling outcomes. But humans, they were the unknown. The Tharix representative spoke again, their mandibles clicking in agitation. "You speak of caution, but what assurance do we have that these humans will not see our caution as weakness? How do we know they will not exploit our diplomatic efforts to advance their own agenda?" Zithrix didn't hesitate. "We don't. But that is the nature of diplomacy. We take a risk, or we face the alternative, a species capable of standing against us in ways we cannot yet predict." The room fell into a tense silence once more. The decision before them was monumental, and they knew it. I could see the weight of it on their faces, even the more stoic members showing signs of unease. The very foundation of the Galactic Council's supremacy was being questioned, and it was by a species that wasn't even fully integrated into the galactic stage yet. Finally, the Algani representative spoke again, their voice measured. "We will take your recommendation under advisement, Observer Zithrix. But be warned, if diplomacy fails, the consequences will be severe for all involved." The warning hung in the air, and with that, the session was adjourned. The council members dispersed, leaving us alone in the vast, echoing chamber. Ralpha exhaled loudly, rubbing his temples. "They don't get it, do they? They still think they can control this." I couldn't disagree. The council had always viewed themselves as the final authority on galactic matters, but they were now facing something they couldn't control. Humanity was an unknown factor, and if history had taught us anything, it was that the unknown could be dangerous. As we made our way back to our quarters, a single thought lingered in my mind. The humans didn't want war, but if pushed, they would fight. And when they did, they wouldn't just fight to win. They would fight to survive. The corridors of the galactic capital's main observatory complex were typically quiet, especially at this hour. Yet as Ralpha and I walked in silence, the echoes of our footsteps felt too loud, too pronounced, as though they might stir something in the still air. We had just laid the fate of the galaxy at the feet of the High Council, and now, in the quiet aftermath, the uncertainty gnawed at me. Ralpha stopped suddenly, turning to face me. His face, usually set in a mask of stoicism, was troubled. "What do we do if they don't listen?" he asked, his voice low. "You saw them in there. They still think they can talk their way out of this, or force the humans into submission." I didn't have an answer. The council was so used to its position as the unquestioned authority in the galaxy, and the idea that a species, especially one as young as humanity, could upend that order was something they just couldn't grasp. They were too entrenched in their power to see the threat clearly. "If the council doesn't listen," I said slowly, "we'll have to make sure someone does." Ralpha's eyes narrowed. "You mean?" "Not everyone in the galaxy is as blind as the council," I continued. "There are other factions, other powers who might see the truth." He sighed, rubbing his face with both hands. "This is bigger than any of us. And yet, here we are, stuck trying to convince a room full of bureaucrats that they're wrong. It's a losing game. I couldn't argue with that. The council wasn't likely to act swiftly, if they acted at all. But the humans wouldn't wait forever. The tension was rising, and every moment we delayed was another moment closer to a confrontation none of us were ready for. As we reached the exit of the observatory, the city beyond spread out before us, its towering spires and glimmering lights casting a soft glow into the night sky. The storm that had been brewing earlier had broken, and rain was now falling in sheets, drenching the city in a cold, steady downpour. Ralpha pulled up the hood of his cloak and gestured for me to follow. "Let's get back to the ship. We need to figure out our next move." I nodded, following him into the storm. The rain was bitterly cold, and it soaked through my cloak within moments, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that diplomacy would fail. The humans were too unpredictable, too volatile, and the council was too slow, too rigid. If the council didn't act soon, the galaxy could be facing a war the likes of which it had never seen. When we reached the docking bay, the familiar sight of our ship, the Velura, was a welcome relief from the cold. The vessel wasn't large by galactic standards, but it was well equipped for observation and transport. More importantly, it was our home in the vastness of space, and right now, it was the only place where I felt even a semblance of control over the chaos we had found ourselves in. Inside, we shed our wet cloaks and made our way to the bridge. The hum of the ship's systems was a comforting sound, and the soft glow of the control panels cast long shadows on the walls. Ralpha immediately took a seat at the communications terminal, pulling up the latest dispatches from the High Council. "Nothing new," he muttered after a moment. "They're still deliberating." I settled into the pilot's chair, staring out at the rain-slicked landing pad beyond. It won't matter soon. The humans will act. Ralpha frowned. "You really think they'll go on the offensive?" "They won't have a choice," I replied. "Once they realize the council is trying to stall, they'll take matters into their own hands. We saw it in their training. They won't wait around for someone else to make the first move. They'll strike." Ralpha leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "Then we need to be ready." We spent the next several hours preparing. While the High Council debated, we gathered intelligence, scouring the galactic networks for any sign of human activity. There were rumors, of course, whispers of human ships moving through uncharted sectors, of military exercises on the fringes of Council space, but nothing concrete. As the hours stretched on, the tension between us grew. We both knew that time was running out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a message came through on the comms. It was encrypted, bearing the seal of the High Council. Ralpha frowned as he opened it. "What does it say?" I asked, leaning over his shoulder. His eyes scanned the message, and his expression darkened. "They've decided to send a delegation to Earth, a diplomatic envoy." I blinked, stunned. "They're still trying to talk." Ralpha nodded grimly. "Looks like it. They're sending a few ships, a mix of species, with orders to open formal negotiations." "And if the humans refuse?" Ralpha shrugged. "Then they'll send in the military." The words hung in the air between us. It was exactly what I had feared. The Council was underestimating the humans, thinking they could be placated or intimidated with diplomacy. But when that failed, and it would fail, they would resort to force. And by then, it would be too late. "We need to get ahead of this," I said suddenly, standing up. "We need to warn the humans." Ralpha looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Warn them? Are you out of your mind? If the Council finds out?" "They won't find out," I interrupted. "And if we don't, this entire galaxy could go up in flames." Ralpha hesitated, torn between his loyalty to the Council and the growing realization that we were heading for disaster. Finally, he sighed and stood up. "All right, let's do it. But if this goes wrong, we're both dead." I didn't respond. There was no point. We both knew the risks, but we also knew that doing nothing was no longer an option. Within minutes, we had plotted a course to Earth, bypassing the usual bureaucratic channels to avoid detection. It was a risky move, but we couldn't afford to wait any longer. The Council's delegation was already on its way, and if we didn't reach the humans first, the galaxy would be plunged into a war it couldn't win. As the Velora lifted off the rain-soaked landing pad and ascended into the dark sky, I felt a sense of grim determination settle over me. The Council had made its decision, but we still had a chance to change the outcome. We were heading straight into the heart of humanity, into the unknown, with nothing but our instincts to guide us. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only move we had left. The stars outside the Velora's viewport streaked into long, glowing trails as the ship slipped into faster-than-light travel. Ralpha and I sat in tense silence, the hum of the engines the only sound between us. Our destination, Earth. Our mission, warn the humans before the Council's delegation arrived and things spiraled out of control. It felt like we were hurtling toward the edge of a cliff, knowing full well we might not be able to stop in time. Ralpha broke the silence first, his voice low and uncertain. "Do you think they'll listen to us?" I kept my eyes on the stars, my mind racing with all the possibilities. "They might. They're not like us. They act fast, think fast. But if we can convince them we're not enemies, maybe we can avoid the worst." Ralpha wasn't convinced. "I just don't get it," he muttered. "How could a species that's so young, so inexperienced, rise to this level of threat? It defies all logic." I shook my head. "They're not just fast learners, they adapt. That's their real strength. We've seen it in their training. They push themselves harder than any species I've ever encountered. They aren't held back by tradition, by what's acceptable. They do whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," Ralpha echoed quietly. We both knew what that meant. The humans wouldn't hesitate to strike back if they felt threatened. That was what made them so dangerous. But it was also what made them fascinating. As we approached the edge of the Sol system, I pulled up the scanner array, checking for any signs of activity. The familiar sight of Earth's solar system came into view, its sun casting a soft glow over the nearby planets. But something else was there, too, an array of ships, bristling with weaponry and power, hanging in the void like silent sentinels. "Their fleet," Ralpha whispered, eyes wide. "It's even bigger than I imagined." I felt the same awe. The humans had amassed a force unlike anything we had ever seen. Their warships, sleek and deadly, were positioned with precision, forming a defensive perimeter around Earth. It wasn't just a show of strength, it was a warning. "They know the Council is coming," I said. "They're ready." Ralpha's hands tightened on the control panel, and we're about to fly right into the middle of it. We sent out a signal as we approached, identifying ourselves as neutral observers. The response was immediate, a curt message directing us to land at a specific site on Earth's surface. No room for negotiation, no explanation. They wanted us there, and they wanted us fast. As the Velora descended through the atmosphere, the landscape of Earth came into view, a vibrant world teeming with life, far different from the sterile cities of the galactic core. It was chaotic, raw, and untamed, and yet there was a sense of order in that chaos, a drive that seemed to pulse through the very air. Our ship landed with a soft thud on a military base, surrounded by towering human structures and rows of armored vehicles. The tension was palpable as we disembarked, our feet hitting the ground with a weight that felt heavier than gravity. A group of humans approached, their uniforms crisp, their eyes sharp. They were soldiers, clearly, and their leader stepped forward, a tall, broad-shouldered man with grizzled features and a gaze that seemed to pierce through me. "You're the alien diplomats?" he asked, his voice gruff but steady. Ralpha nodded. "We're here to warn you. The Council is sending a delegation, but it's a trap. If you don't agree to their terms, they'll send in the military." The human's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read, perhaps amusement, perhaps frustration. "We know," he said simply. I blinked, caught off guard. "You know?" The man, General Carter, I gathered from the insignia on his uniform, gave a slight nod. "We've intercepted their communications. We're well aware of what's coming." Ralpha and I exchanged a glance. "Then why haven't you acted?" I asked. "Why wait?" Carter's expression hardened. "Because we don't start wars, we end them." His words sent a chill through me. There was no bravado in his tone, no posturing, just a simple statement of fact. The humans were prepared to defend themselves, but they wouldn't strike first. It was a level of restraint I hadn't expected. But there was something else, something deeper. I could see it in the way the soldiers around us moved, in the way they carried themselves. They weren't just prepared for battle. They were prepared for anything. "You think the Council will push you?" I said slowly. Carter's jaw tightened. "They're already pushing, sending diplomats to strong-arm us. It's the oldest trick in the book. They think they can intimidate us, make us back down." Ralpha stepped forward. "But you won't." Carter's eyes locked onto his, unflinching. "No, we won't." I could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric. The humans weren't going to be bullied, but at the same time, they weren't eager for a fight. It was a paradox that I struggled to understand. Ralpha, however, seemed to sense the same thing. "What do you plan to do?" Carter's gaze softened, just a fraction. "We're going to give them a choice. Walk away or face the consequences." "And if they don't walk away?" I asked. The general's lips curled into a tight smile. "Then we show them what human training can really do." The words hung in the air, a quiet threat that echoed in my mind. The Council had no idea what they were walking into. The humans weren't just another species to be negotiated with, bullied, or coerced. They were something else entirely, something the galaxy had never encountered before. "Come with me," Carter said abruptly, turning on his heel and gesturing for us to follow. We trailed behind him, through the base and into a large, open field. At first, I didn't understand why he had brought us here. It was just an expanse of grass, empty save for a few soldiers going through their drills. But then I saw it. Off in the distance, a group of human soldiers were running an exercise. Not just running, they were pushing themselves to the limit, their bodies straining, their faces etched with determination. And as I watched, it hit me. The training we had witnessed before was just the beginning. This was something more. "These are our elites," Carter said quietly, his eyes fixed on the soldiers. "Special forces, the best of the best." I stared in awe. The humans weren't just training for war, they were mastering it. Every movement, every action was precise, calculated. It wasn't just brute strength or endurance. It was something deeper, something almost primal. "They're prepared for anything," Carter continued. "Not just combat, survival, adaptation, infiltration. You name it, they can do it." Ralpha's voice was barely a whisper. "And the Council thinks they can win." Carter turned to face us, his expression grim. "The Council doesn't know what it's dealing with. They've underestimated us from the start. But when the time comes, we'll be ready." There was nothing more to say. We had come to warn the humans, but it was clear that they didn't need our warning. They already knew. They were ready for the storm that was coming. And in that moment, I realized the truth. The galaxy would never be the same. The hum of the engines filled the command room of the Valor, a name that had quickly become synonymous with humanity's newfound power in the galaxy. Standing beside me, General Carter surveyed the holographic display projected in front of us, detailing the movements of various alien fleets circling Earth like vultures waiting for the right moment to strike. Tension hung in the air like a thick fog, and I could feel the weight of history bearing down upon us. "Do you see that?" Carter's finger pointed at a cluster of vessels near the outer reaches of the Sol system. "Those are Zarvan warships. We've confirmed they've entered a defensive formation." "They're not just protecting themselves," I replied, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. "They're preparing for an attack. They want to capitalize on the chaos." Carter's brow furrowed as he considered the implications. "And the Council's stirring the pot. If they're getting Zarvan support, it means they're desperate enough to enlist the help of any species willing to fight us." I had seen the Council's tactics before, underhanded, manipulative, and ruthless. They would do anything to maintain their authority and prevent humanity from disrupting their carefully balanced status quo. We can't let them catch us off guard, I said. We need to strengthen our defenses and gather allies of our own. Carter nodded, his jaw set with determination. I'll send out a call to the military outposts and request a strategic briefing with the other leaders. We need to unify our forces, not just here on Earth, but throughout the colonies. Every human world needs to know what we're facing. As he began issuing orders, I felt a rush of gratitude for the humans' capacity to adapt and rally together. Despite the uncertainty of our situation, there was an undeniable strength that came from being part of a unified effort. I glanced at the map again, the swirling colors representing different factions, and a thought struck me. What about the Zenthrians? I asked. They're known for their diplomatic prowess. If we can convince them to support us, we could turn the tide. Carter looked up, his expression thoughtful. That's a gamble. They're unpredictable, and their telepathy can create divisions among our ranks if they decide to play both sides. True, but they also dislike the Council. If we can emphasize the threat they pose, we might be able to sway them. As Carter mulled it over, I felt a sudden sense of urgency. We couldn't afford to waste time. The Council was already rallying its allies, and if we didn't act quickly, we might find ourselves overwhelmed. Let's send an envoy, I suggested. We can offer them something access to our technology, perhaps? The Zenthrians value knowledge as much as power. If we can pique their interest, they might be persuaded to join our cause. Carter nodded. That's a solid plan. I'll appoint a team to reach out to them. In the meantime, we'll prepare for potential conflicts on multiple fronts. The command room buzzed with activity as officers received orders and began coordinating efforts. I watched the holographic display, feeling a strange mix of dread and hope. This was the start of something monumental, and we had to be ready for whatever lay ahead. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and strategizing. I spent hours working alongside Carter and the other leaders, formulating battle plans, ensuring our defenses were bolstered, and gathering intelligence on the Council's movements. But amidst the frenzy, I couldn't shake the feeling of looming danger. Each passing day brought news of additional alien fleets joining the Council's ranks, and our own ships were stretched thin. Finally, the moment arrived. We had secured a meeting with the Zenthrian leadership on one of their neutral planets, a lush, verdant world known for its sprawling cities that intertwined with nature. The Zenthrians had a unique architecture that respected their environment, using biolite materials and natural structures to create breathtaking designs. As we descended onto their surface, I marveled at the beauty surrounding us. The vibrant flora seemed to pulse with energy, as if the planet itself was alive, welcoming us. But the beauty was a stark contrast to the seriousness of our mission. Upon landing, we were escorted to a grand chamber, its walls shimmering with living light. Zenthrians, with their sleek forms and ethereal presence, stood awaiting us, their expressions inscrutable. Their leader, a tall being named Virithas, stepped forward, his telepathic aura creating a subtle shift in the air. "Welcome, humans," he said, his voice echoing in my mind. "You bring news, I sense. But the question is, do you bring hope or despair?" Carter took a step forward, his confidence unwavering. "We bring a chance for unity against a common threat. The Galactic Council seeks to undermine both our peoples, and it's in our best interest to stand together." Virithas tilted his head, his golden eyes glimmering with intrigue. "You seek our alliance, but what do you offer in return?" "We offer access to our technology and knowledge," Carter replied. "We have developed weapons and defenses that can counter the Council's fleets. Together, we can secure peace." The Zenthrians exchanged glances, their telepathic connections evident in the subtle movements of their antennae. The tension in the room was palpable. "What if we refuse?" Virithas asked. "What if we choose to remain neutral?" "Then you risk being caught in the crossfire," I interjected, stepping forward. "The Council won't stop until they eradicate the human influence, and you'll be viewed as either an ally or an enemy. There is no middle ground anymore." Virithas regarded me with curiosity, as if weighing my words carefully. You are bold, human, but we have seen the Council's ruthlessness. They will not shy away from collateral damage to achieve their goals. And neither will we, Carter replied, his voice firm. But with your help, we can shift the balance of power. We can protect our worlds and secure a future for both of our peoples. The chamber fell silent as the Zenthrians contemplated our offer. I could sense the swirling emotions among them: fear, hope, uncertainty. The stakes were high, and the weight of the decision was heavy. Finally, Virithas stepped forward, the light surrounding him intensifying. We will deliberate further. But know this, humans, if we choose to stand with you, we will demand full transparency and mutual respect. We cannot afford to be seen as pawns in your conflict. Carter nodded, a hint of a smile creeping onto his face. Agreed. Together, we will fight as equals. As we departed the chamber, I felt a surge of optimism. It was a small step, but it was progress. If we could secure the Zenthrians' support, it could change everything. But even as hope blossomed, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. What if the Council had anticipated this move? What if they were already devising a plan to thwart us? I glanced back at Carter, who was lost in thought, his brow furrowed with concentration. The weight of the galaxy rested on our shoulders, and the path ahead was fraught with peril. We had no time to waste. The storm was coming, and we needed to be ready. As we made our way back to the US Valor, the verdant landscape of the Zenthrian planet receded behind us, but the weight of our discussions lingered in the air. Carter and I had secured a tentative alliance, yet the road ahead was perilous. Every decision we made could have monumental consequences, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were racing against an unseen clock. Once aboard the ship, I headed to the command center, eager to sift through the incoming intelligence reports. The crew was buzzing with activity. Holographic displays light the dimly lit room as officers relayed updates from all corners of the galaxy. It was a hive of tension, excitement, and the palpable undercurrent of fear. "Raltha," a voice called from across the room. It was Lieutenant Torres, a sharp-eyed officer who had quickly become an invaluable asset. "You'll want to see this." I approached her station, my heart racing as she gestured to a series of incoming transmissions. The images flickered on the screen, revealing a chaotic scene. Zarvan ships had mobilized in force, their sleek vessels gliding through the void like predators hunting prey. "Intelligence confirms they're en route to Earth," Torres reported, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. "The Council has united them for an assault. They're aiming for a full-scale invasion." "Damn it," I muttered, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "We need to act fast. What's our status on defenses?" "We're still reinforcing key locations, but we'll be outnumbered unless we get the Zenthrians on our side quickly. If they join us, we might stand a chance." Carter strode in just as I was absorbing the news, his expression grim. "What's the situation?" "Zarvans are mobilizing for an attack," I replied. "They're heading straight for Earth. We need to prepare our defenses immediately." Carter's jaw tightened. "Get the fleet ready for combat. We'll need every ship operational and all hands on deck." As the crew scrambled to carry out his orders, I could feel the energy in the room shift. It was a mix of fear and determination, a heady concoction that both terrified and inspired me. We were no longer mere pawns in a cosmic game. We were fighting for our survival, for our homes, and for the right to exist in a galaxy that seemed determined to crush us. Hours later, I found myself standing on the bridge of the US Valor, gazing out at the stars. The beauty of the cosmos was a stark contrast to the impending threat. My thoughts drifted back to the Zenthrians. Would they come through for us? "Raltha," Torres' voice broke through my reverie. "We've received a communication from the Zenthrians. They've decided to join our cause." I felt a rush of relief and hope. "What are their terms?" "They want access to our advanced weapon systems and strategic intelligence. They'll also be sending reinforcements to our fleet." "Good," Carter said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll need every advantage we can get." As the Zenthrian ships began to arrive, a new sense of camaraderie filled the Valor. Their biolite vessels moved gracefully alongside our fleet, a mesmerizing dance of light and color that signified a united front. "Lieutenant, prepare a status update for the fleet," Carter ordered. "We need to rally everyone and discuss our strategy." Torres nodded and started coordinating with other ships. I turned my attention back to the view outside. The Zarvan fleet was growing closer, and the dread in my gut intensified. We had to be ready. Suddenly, alarms blared, cutting through the tension like a knife. The bridge erupted into chaos as red lights flashed. I whipped around to face Torres. "What's happening?" "We've got incoming vessels," she shouted, her fingers flying over her console. "It's the Zarvans. They're initiating their assault." "Bring up the tactical display," Carter commanded. The holographic map flared to life, showing the Zarvan ships approaching at breakneck speed, flanked by smaller craft darting like angry wasps. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the scope of the situation. We were vastly outnumbered, but we had no choice. "Prepare for battle," Carter shouted, his voice steady. "All hands, to your stations." The ship's crew leaped into action, adrenaline coursing through them. I moved to my designated position at the tactical console, my heart racing as I focused on the incoming fleet. "Lieutenant, do we have visual on their formations?" "Coming up now," she replied. The holographic display shifted, showing the Zarvan ships arranged in a menacing wedge formation, preparing to break through our defenses. "Target their command ship first," I instructed. "If we can disrupt their coordination, we might have a fighting chance." "Firing weapons," Torres called out, her fingers dancing over the controls. The Valor shuddered as our cannons unleashed a barrage of energy bolts toward the Zarvan command ship. I held my breath as the projectiles sped through space, striking the lead vessel. The explosion lit up the darkness, sending shockwaves through the surrounding ships. A cheer erupted from the crew, but I knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Zarvans were relentless. They wouldn't back down easily. "Reinforcements are arriving," Torres shouted, her eyes wide with excitement. The Zenthrian ships moved into formation, their energy shields shimmering as they engaged the Zarvan forces. "Good. We need to create a distraction," Carter said. "We'll split our forces. Half will hold the line while the rest flanks their left side." The crew worked in perfect harmony, each member executing their role with precision. The Valor surged forward, and I felt a rush of exhilaration mingled with fear as I prepared for the chaos that lay ahead. As we broke into the fray, lasers and energy blasts filled the void, painting a chaotic picture of destruction. I maneuvered the ship expertly, avoiding incoming fire while returning our own volleys against the relentless Zarvans. Then, amidst the chaos, I caught sight of something unexpected. A ship unlike any I had seen before broke through the Zarvan ranks, its sleek hull gleaming menacingly. "What the hell is that?" I muttered under my breath. "Unknown class," Torres replied, her voice taut with tension. "But it's definitely not Zarvan. It's more advanced." Carter's expression hardened. "Whatever it is, it's coming straight for us. Prepare to engage." As the strange vessel approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a skirmish. The stakes had risen, and the fate of our people hung in the balance. With our forces spread thin, we needed to hold fast and adapt, or we would be overwhelmed by not just the Zarvans, but whatever else the Council had in store for us. The unidentified ship loomed larger on the tactical display, cutting through the Zarvan fleet with unsettling precision. Its design was smooth, almost organic, with glowing veins of energy tracing its surface. It glided through the chaos like a predator honing in on its prey. I felt a chill creep down my spine. This wasn't just another Zarvan ship. Whatever it was, it had advanced far beyond what even the Council's forces typically employed. "Any idea what we're dealing with?" I asked Torres, my voice barely hiding the edge of unease. "None," she replied. "But the energy readings are off the charts. It's more powerful than anything we've encountered." Carter narrowed his eyes, watching the display intently. "It's not acting like the others. It's not engaging our forces indiscriminately." He was right. The mysterious vessel wasn't wasting time in the larger battle. It was making a beeline straight for us, ignoring everything else in its path. "Shields at maximum," Carter ordered. "Prepare all weapons. We won't let this thing through." The bridge fell silent as everyone worked feverishly at their stations. Tension crackled in the air like the moments before a storm. The ship's engines hummed beneath my feet, a steady rhythm that belied the chaos outside. As the alien craft neared, I felt my palms grow slick with sweat. "We can't let it close the distance," I muttered. "Taurus, fire at will." The Valor's guns erupted once more, sending a barrage of energy bolts toward the incoming ship. Each blast streaked across the dark expanse, colliding with the unknown vessel's shimmering shields. But instead of the explosions we expected, the shots dissipated like drops of water on a superheated surface. What I started, but Taurus cut me off. "It's absorbing the energy." I stared in disbelief as the alien ship glowed brighter with each hit, siphoning our attacks and growing stronger. Whatever this ship was, its technology was far beyond anything we'd seen before. "They're turning our weapons against us," Carter growled, gripping the arm of his command chair. "Switch to kinetic rounds. Now." Taurus scrambled to change the weapon systems. Kinetic rounds loaded. Firing. The Valor's guns spat out solid projectiles this time, each one a hardened slug designed to tear through hull plating. The rounds raced toward the alien ship, striking its sleek surface with a series of deafening thuds. But the craft hardly flinched. It absorbed the impacts as if they were nothing more than mild disturbances. Worse, the energy readings spiked again. "It's still gaining power," Torres reported, her voice cracking with frustration. "Nothing we're doing is slowing it down." Carter gritted his teeth. "This isn't just a ship. It's a weapon, something designed to neutralize entire fleets." I could see it in his eyes, the grim realization that our best efforts might not be enough. For a moment, doubt gnawed at me. What chance did we have against something like this? Was this the true strength of the Council? Then, as if sensing our hesitation, the alien craft unleashed its own attack. A blinding beam of light shot from the ship's hull, cutting through space and slamming into our shields. The Valor groaned under the strain, the energy field crackling as it absorbed the impact. Alarms blared as power surged through the ship's systems, threatening to overload. "Shields at 60%, Torres shouted over the din. "We can't take much more of that." I gripped the edge of my console, my mind racing. We couldn't win this fight head-on. The alien ship was too powerful, too advanced. We needed a new strategy, something the enemy wouldn't expect. And then it hit me. "Carter," I said, turning to the captain, "we can't fight this thing on its terms. It's adapting to everything we throw at it. But what if we can disrupt its systems?" Carter frowned. "Disrupt how?" "Look at its movements. It's precise, almost machine-like. What if it's controlled by an AI or some advanced computer system? If we can overload its sensors, throw off its targeting, we might be able to buy ourselves some time." Carter's eyes lit up with understanding. "A diversion. Jam its sensors and hit it while it's disoriented." "Exactly," I nodded. "We need to blind it, even for a few seconds." "Torres," Carter barked, "prepare an EMP pulse. Focus it on that ship." Torres hesitated for a moment. "Captain, an EMP will affect us too. Our systems will go down temporarily." "It's a risk we have to take," Carter replied. "If we don't, that thing will tear us apart." She nodded and began making the necessary adjustments. The hum of the ship's engines grew louder, the energy building as we prepared to unleash the pulse. "Ready," Torres said, her fingers hovering over the controls. Carter took a deep breath. "Do it." The Valor shuddered as the EMP pulse fired, a wave of electromagnetic energy rippling out from the ship. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. I held my breath, waiting for the systems to reboot. When the lights came back on, I glanced at the tactical display. The alien ship was drifting, its movements sluggish and erratic. "It worked," I whispered. "It's disoriented." "We don't have much time," Carter said. "All weapons, fire now." The Valor unleashed everything it had. Torpedoes, energy blasts, kinetic rounds, all of it targeted the alien ship's vulnerable sections. Without its precision, the alien craft struggled to evade the onslaught. The first torpedo struck its hull, detonating in a blinding explosion. For the first time, the ship's shields flickered. Another round of kinetic fire tore through its armor, and the once mighty vessel began to break apart. "We're getting through," Torres shouted, her voice filled with triumph. But before we could celebrate, the alien ship made a desperate move. Its core glowed with a blinding light, energy building up for one final strike. "Brace for impact," Carter yelled. The alien vessel exploded in a violent burst of energy, sending shockwaves through space. The Valor was hit hard, thrown off course as systems overloaded and alarms screamed. For a few moments, the bridge was in chaos. Smoke filled the air, and I could hear the frantic shouts of the crew as they struggled to regain control. But then, slowly, the ship's systems stabilized. The chaos subsided, and the crew began to assess the damage. "Status report," Carter demanded, his voice hoarse. "Shields are down," Torres said, coughing through the smoke. "Hull integrity is holding, but we've taken significant damage." I slumped in my seat, exhaustion washing over me. We had survived barely. The alien ship was gone, but at a great cost. Carter stood tall, surveying the bridge. His eyes were hard, but there was a glint of determination there. "This was just the beginning," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Whatever that ship was, it's a warning. The Council is coming for us with everything they've got." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And the galaxy was about to witness what humans could truly endure. In the aftermath of the battle, the crew of the Valor was left to assess the full extent of the damage. The bridge, though functional, looked like it had taken a beating. Scorched panels, half-fried consoles, and the lingering smell of burnt circuits filled the air. Sparks flew from a few exposed wires above me, and for a moment I was too tired to even care. But exhaustion was a luxury we couldn't afford. "Damage reports are still coming in," Torres muttered from her station, sweat glistening on her forehead. "We've lost our secondary power grid, shields are offline, and the main reactor is at 50% capacity." "We're a flying coffin," Carter said, pacing in front of his command chair, his features tense but composed. "But we're still flying. How long until the drive is back online?" Torres glanced down at her console, tapping a few keys. "If we can divert power from non-essential systems and keep the crew working around the clock. 20 hours at best." Carter grimaced, then turned to me. "We don't have 20 hours. I didn't need to be told twice. Even though the Zarvan fleet was in disarray after the mysterious ship's destruction, we were far from safe. It wouldn't take long for them to regroup, and we were a sitting duck in the middle of contested space. "We need a plan," I said, leaning heavily against the wall as I tried to shake off the fatigue. My mind raced, scanning through the options. "We can't rely on brute force. We need to outthink them." Torres spoke up. "There's an asteroid field nearby, dense and filled with metallic debris. We could use it to our advantage, mask our signature until we make repairs." Carter stopped pacing and looked at her. "It's a gamble." "It's the only option," I added. "If we stay out here in the open, we're dead. If we hide, we might buy enough time to get the drive running and slip out." For a long moment, Carter considered our words. Then he nodded, his decision made. "Torres, plot a course to the asteroid field. Let's hope they don't see us vanish." The Valor lurched forward, its engines sputtering as they carried us toward the dark expanse of floating rocks ahead. The field was massive, filled with shattered asteroids and the remnants of long-forgotten space battles. It was dangerous, but it was also our best chance of survival. As we neared the edge of the field, Torres lowered the ship's energy signature, reducing our visibility on any long-range sensors. The lights dimmed, and the bridge fell into an eerie quiet as the hum of power died down to a whisper. "We're invisible for now," Torres said, her voice barely above a murmur. "But if they come looking, they'll find us." "We'll deal with that when it happens," Carter replied, settling back into his chair. He looked at me, his eyes hard. "How long do you think we've got before they realize we're hiding?" "Hours, maybe less," I answered, my voice low. "If they're smart, they'll send out scout ships to comb the area." Torres sighed. "Let's just hope they're too busy licking their wounds after that last fight." We drifted deeper into the asteroid field, the Valor weaving through the floating debris with a slow, deliberate grace. The tension on the bridge was palpable, everyone hyper-aware of how vulnerable we were. One wrong move, one careless signal, and the Zarvans would be on us. I could see the strain on everyone's faces. Even Carter, who was normally unshakable, seemed to be feeling the weight of our situation. But it wasn't just the current crisis gnawing at me, it was the larger question looming in the back of my mind. That ship. I couldn't shake the image of it, sleek, powerful, utterly alien. It had fought like nothing I'd ever seen before, adapting to every strategy we'd thrown at it. And then there was its ultimate fate, that final, desperate surge of energy before it had detonated. It didn't feel like a random occurrence. It was calculated, as if the ship had chosen to self-destruct rather than let us study it or recover its technology. "What do you think that thing was?" I asked Carter quietly, though I knew he was thinking the same thing. He rubbed his chin, staring at the dark void outside the bridge's viewport. "No idea. But it wasn't just a Zarvan ship, it was something more." I frowned. "You think it was a prototype? Something experimental?" Carter shook his head. "Maybe, but there was a precision to it, a level of sophistication that doesn't fit with what we know about Zarvan tech. That wasn't just another war machine, it was a game changer." A heavy silence fell between us as we both stared into the distance. The Valor moved slowly through the asteroid field, and for a while it seemed like we had successfully disappeared into the shadows. Until the alarm started blaring. "Multiple contacts," Torres shouted, her hands flying over the controls. "3 Zarvan scout ships entering the field. They've detected us." Carter sprang to his feet. "Weapons online, now." "Weapon systems are still offline," Torres shot back. "We're sitting ducks." I felt a surge of panic, but quickly pushed it down. This was the moment that would either make or break us. We had to act fast or face annihilation. "Divert all remaining power to the engines," I said, an idea forming in my mind. "We can't fight them head-on, but we can still outrun them." Torres looked at me, wide-eyed. "If we push the engines any harder, we'll burn out the core." "We don't need to outrun them for long," I said, "just long enough to lose them in the field." Carter considered my plan for a heartbeat, then nodded. "Do it." The Valor surged forward, the engines roaring to life as we weaved through the asteroid field at breakneck speed. The scout ships were fast, but the dense field worked to our advantage, slowing them down as they dodged the larger chunks of rock. "Hold course," Carter ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around us. Torres' hands flew across the controls, expertly maneuvering the ship through the debris. But the scout ships were relentless, closing the distance with each passing second. "We're not going to make it," Torres whispered under her breath. I refused to accept that. There had to be another way. "Torres," I said, an idea hitting me like a bolt of lightning. "Can you use the debris to our advantage?" She shot me a confused look. "What do you mean?" "Use the tractor beam. Pull one of the larger asteroids into our path, and then release it. We can create an obstacle they can't avoid." Torres hesitated, then nodded. "It's risky, but it might work." Without another word, she activated the tractor beam, locking onto a massive chunk of metallic debris floating ahead of us. The Valor groaned under the strain as we dragged the asteroid into our wake. "Release it on my mark," I said, watching the tactical display as the scout ships closed in. We waited for the right moment, the seconds ticking by like hours. Then, just as the scout ships lined up behind us, I shouted, "Now!" Torres released the asteroid, and it tumbled backward through space, directly into the path of the pursuing ships. The first scout ship tried to veer off course, but it was too late. The asteroid collided with it, shattering the ship into pieces. The other two scouts scrambled to avoid the debris, but in the confusion, they lost sight of us. "We've lost them," Torres said, a note of disbelief in her voice. For the first time in what felt like hours, I allowed myself a breath of relief. We had bought ourselves some time. But I knew this wasn't over. The Zarvans wouldn't give up that easily, and whatever that mysterious ship had been, it was just the beginning. The real fight was still ahead of us. The Zarvan scouts might have been behind us for now, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air, thick and oppressive. The Valor crept deeper into the asteroid field, hidden for the moment, but we all knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The Zarvan fleet would be back stronger, angrier, and with a vengeance that could shatter us if we weren't prepared. Carter's voice broke the silence. "How long until we get the drive operational?" Torres tapped a few buttons, the dim light of her console flickering ominously. "At least 12 more hours. We're working as fast as we can, but the damage was severe." I didn't have to look around to know that wasn't good enough. A dozen hours out here was more than enough time for the Zarvans to regroup. We were running out of options. "What's our next move?" I asked, leaning against the wall for support. The physical toll of the battle was catching up with me, but I couldn't afford to rest, not now. Carter crossed his arms, his jaw clenched as he weighed our choices. "We can't keep running. The Zarvans will sweep the field eventually. We need to prepare for a fight, even if we're not at full strength." "A fight?" I raised an eyebrow. "We barely made it out alive last time." Torres turned in her seat, shooting me a glare. "Do you have a better idea, Jaren?" Her words stung, but I didn't blame her. Everyone was on edge. "I don't," I admitted. "But we need something more than just brute force. If we fight them straight on, we're dead." "Then what do you suggest?" Carter asked, his gaze piercing through me. I took a deep breath, considering the asteroid field around us. The jagged rocks, the floating debris, the scattered remains of ancient battles long forgotten. It was a chaotic, dangerous place. But it was also an opportunity. "We used the field to our advantage," I said slowly, the idea forming in my mind. "The Zarvans are disciplined, but they're predictable. They'll send scouts to flush us out, and then their main fleet will follow. We turn this field into a trap." Torres looked skeptical. "A trap? Against a fleet?" "Not the whole fleet," I corrected. "But if we can funnel their scouts into a bottleneck, we can take them out in small groups. They'll lose their eyes and ears, and the main fleet will be blind when they come after us." Carter's expression didn't change, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. "And you think we can do this without shields or weapons?" "We don't need weapons," I said, my confidence growing. "We use the debris, the asteroids. We make the field work for us. They're flying into a natural minefield. All we have to do is set it off." Torres was already nodding, her fingers flying over her console as she pulled up a tactical map of the surrounding area. "It's risky, but if we can time it right, we might be able to pull it off." Carter glanced between us, his decision made. "Do it. Torres, plot the coordinates. Jaren, gather a team. We're going to need every available hand to get this ready." I didn't hesitate. As soon as I left the bridge, I gathered a small crew: engineers, technicians, anyone who wasn't already knee-deep in repairs. We didn't have much time, but we had a plan. Hours later, the Valor was deep within the asteroid field, tucked behind a massive chunk of rock that shielded us from long-range scans. The crew worked in tense, hushed silence, setting up makeshift explosives, rigging old thrusters to pieces of debris, and programming drones to lure the Zarvan scouts into the kill zone. I checked in with Torres, who had taken the lead on coordinating the operation. "How's it looking?" "We've got 6 drones prepped and ready," she said, not looking up from her console. "The debris is rigged to blow, and the asteroids are set to be propelled at high velocity once the thrusters are triggered." "It'll work," I said, more to reassure myself than her. I had to believe it would work. We didn't have a backup plan. Torres glanced at me, her usual sharpness tempered by exhaustion. "You sure about this, Joran? This whole thing is held together by duct tape and hope." I smiled grimly. "It's all we've got." As the final preparations were made, I returned to the bridge where Carter stood, his arms crossed as he stared at the tactical display. The tension was palpable, the crew watching the scanners for any sign of movement. "They're coming," Torres said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "I've got 3 scout ships entering the field, right on schedule." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Are they taking the bait?" Torres watched the display, her fingers hovering over the controls. "They're hesitating, but yes, they're moving into the designated zone." "Prepare to activate the drones," Carter ordered, his voice steady. "We only get one shot at this." The drones were our wild card. Each one was programmed to give off a faint energy signature, just enough to look like a damaged ship struggling to hide. The Zarvan scouts, ever methodical, wouldn't pass up the chance to investigate, and when they got close enough, we would trigger the debris. "The first scout is approaching the debris field," Torres said, her voice tense. "Second and third ships are following. They're staying in formation." "Wait for them to get closer," I said, watching the display like a hawk. "We need them bunched together." The seconds ticked by, each one stretching out painfully as we watched the blips on the screen. The scouts were moving cautiously, but they were moving. Finally, they entered the kill zone. "Now," I shouted. Torres slammed her hand down on the console, and the drones activated, giving off a burst of energy that made them appear as if they were powering up for a fight. At the same time, the thrusters on the debris fired, sending jagged chunks of metal and rock hurtling toward the scouts. The first scout ship didn't stand a chance. The debris slammed into it from multiple angles, tearing through its shields and hull like paper. The second ship tried to veer off, but it was too late. A massive asteroid collided with its side, crushing it instantly. The third scout ship, faster than the others, managed to dodge the worst of the debris. But as it tried to escape, Torres triggered the explosives we'd planted, and the field erupted in a violent cascade of shrapnel. The scout ship was shredded in seconds. Silence fell over the bridge as the dust settled. Carter exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since the battle had started. "That's 3 down. Any sign of the main fleet?" Torres shook her head. "Not yet, but they'll be coming. We bought ourselves some time, but not much." I leaned back in my seat, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. "Let's hope the drive's ready before they get here." As the crew continued repairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Zarvans were methodical, yes, but they were also relentless. The fact that they hadn't sent more ships after us was strange. Too strange. I returned to the bridge, my mind racing. "Carter, I've been thinking, what if they're not coming after us?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "They know we're hiding," I said, pacing back and forth. "But what if they're not trying to destroy us? What if they're trying to capture us?" Carter's eyes widened slightly as he realized what I was getting at. "You think they want the ship?" "Not just the ship," I said, my heart pounding. "They want the technology. They want to know how we managed to take out one of their advanced warships." Carter's face darkened. "If that's true, then we're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting to keep our secrets. And if they capture us," I said, my voice low, "they'll get everything." The weight of my realization hung over the bridge like a thick, suffocating cloud. The Zarvans weren't just hunting us, they were playing the long game. The warship we had destroyed, the maneuver we pulled off, and now, the fact that we were limping through space, everything pointed to one horrifying truth. They wanted the Valor. They wanted its secrets. "Carter, ever the steady hand, didn't falter. Torres, get me an estimate on how much time we have left before the fleet moves in. Torres glanced at her console, her face pale. 5 hours, maybe less. They're keeping their distance, but that's only because they're waiting for us to run out of options. I clenched my fists. They were waiting for us to die out here, all while the fleet circled like vultures. We can't let them get their hands on the ship, I said, my voice hard. If they do, they'll have everything, our tech, our tactics, everything we've developed. They'll reverse engineer it and use it against the entire Federation. Carter nodded grimly. I know. That's why we're going to destroy it. I blinked, not sure I had heard him correctly. Destroy it? The Valor? The ship is compromised, Carter said, his tone resolute. We can't let it fall into enemy hands. The Zarvans know this ship is more valuable than a dozen battle victories. If they take us alive or even salvage the wreckage, the entire galaxy will be at risk. But we're still on it, I shot back. There has to be another way. There isn't, Torres said quietly, her eyes meeting mine. The warp drive won't be ready in time. Even if we could escape, they'd follow us. The only way to protect what we've learned here is to ensure they can't get any of it. Carter turned to me. Jaren, I need you to evacuate the remaining crew to the lifeboats. We'll hide in the asteroid field and wait for a Federation ship to pick us up. But we won't be leaving the Valor intact. The cold finality of his words sent a shiver down my spine, but I understood. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about the bigger picture. The galaxy was at stake, and sometimes sacrifices had to be made. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. I'll get the crew ready. The evacuation was swift, silent, and efficient. The crew, battle-hardened and disciplined, understood the gravity of the situation. There were no complaints, no second-guessing, just a shared, grim determination. We had all fought too hard to let our work be undone now. As I oversaw the last of the lifeboats being prepped, Carter called me to the bridge. It's time. I jogged back to the command deck, finding him standing at the central console with Torres. The asteroid field shimmered on the screen in front of us, a treacherous expanse of rock and debris. The perfect place to hide if only we weren't leaving behind our ship. Carter's fingers hovered over the controls. Torres, initiate the self-destruct sequence. Set it for 20 minutes. That should give us enough time to get clear. Torres nodded, her face pale but determined. Self-destruct sequence initiated. Countdown in progress. The automated voice of the ship confirmed her words, a calm, almost soothing tone that seemed entirely out of place. 20 minutes until critical failure. I glanced out the viewport one last time, taking in the sleek, battle-scarred form of the Valor. She had carried us through countless battles, survived against impossible odds, and now she was about to be sacrificed. Lifeboats are ready, I reported, my voice tight. We just need to get clear of the blast radius. Carter gave me a grim smile. Then let's not waste any more time. The lifeboats were cramped and uncomfortable, each one designed for short-term survival in space. We crammed in as much as we could: supplies, emergency oxygen, and the bare essentials. The mood was tense, the crew silent as we launched from the Valor, drifting into the asteroid field to wait for the inevitable. I sat in the cramped confines of my lifeboat, staring out the small porthole as the Valor shrank in the distance. Torres had taken the lifeboat next to mine, her face hard as stone, her eyes locked on the tactical display. The Zarvans are closing in, she said through the comms. They're not scanning the lifeboats. They're only focused on the Valor. Let them get close, Carter replied from his lifeboat. They're about to get a hell of a surprise. The minutes ticked by painfully slow, each one bringing the Zarvan fleet closer. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Was this really going to work? Would the blast be enough to cripple the Zarvans, or were we simply delaying the inevitable? 10 seconds, Torres said quietly. I held my breath. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2. The Valor exploded in a brilliant burst of light and fire, the shock wave rippling through space, catching the nearest Zarvan ships completely off guard. The force of the explosion tore through their ranks, sending debris and shrapnel hurtling in all directions. Several ships were obliterated instantly, their shields no match for the sheer power of the blast. The rest of the Zarvan fleet scrambled to retreat, but the damage had been done. The asteroid field, now destabilized by the explosion, began to shift and collapse in on itself, creating a chaotic, deadly environment that no ship could safely navigate. "We did it," I whispered, barely able to believe it. Carter's voice came over the comms, calm and steady. "We bought ourselves some time, but we're not out of the woods yet. We need to stay hidden until Federation reinforcements arrive." Hours passed, each one a slow crawl as we waited in the lifeboats, hidden among the debris of the asteroid field. The Zarvans, still reeling from the explosion, had pulled back, their remaining ships too damaged to continue the hunt. Finally, a message came through, faint but unmistakable. "This is the Federation ship Vanguard. We've received your distress signal and are en route to your location. Hold tight, we're coming to get you." Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered by the loss of the Valor. We had won, yes, but it had come at a cost. As the Federation ship drew closer, I glanced at Carter through the viewport of his lifeboat. He met my gaze, his expression unreadable, but there was a glint of something in his eyes, pride, maybe. Or perhaps it was just the reflection of the distant stars. "We did what we had to do," he said over the comms, as if reading my thoughts. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, we did." As the Vanguard took us aboard and we were escorted to safety, I couldn't help but think of all the battles still ahead of us. The Zarvans had been dealt a blow today, but the war was far from over, and while we had lost one ship, we still had the will, the knowledge, and the strength to keep fighting. The Valor may have been gone, but its spirit, our spirit, wasn't. Not by a long shot. And as long as there were humans left to fight, the Zarvans would never have the upper hand.